Okay, so maybe they're a day late. WNFL, these are going to be the video reviews. I'm probably going to end up doing them on Wednesdays. That way I can incorporate what you guys do on the waiver wire along with the actual weekly review. So Wednesday might be the best day to be doing this. I don't know. We'll see going forward. This is all brand new. Let's get this thing kicked off. Week 1 is in the books, and we have ourselves the first power rankings of the season. The number 1 team this week sits in the Billy Madison division, and that was Pete Langworth's Big Blue Wrecking Crew, who was in a shootout with Canadian Bacon Ray Leclerc this week. Ray, put up 142 points. I think that was good for like 3rd in the league. He would have beaten everybody except for Pete and Adam this week. So kind of disappointing to see, that much production with a big loss on your record there, Ray. For Pete, who won the week, got a really solid week out of his, he got a really great week out of his wide receivers, Keenan Allen, Deshaun Jackson, and Tyrell Williams. 77 combined points compared to Ray, who only got 20 combined points from Mike Evans, Tyler Lockett, and Will Fuller. When you look at this, not much else, is close, or is not close rather. Pete was outscored quite a bit at the quarterback position, but that only mitigates the 50-point difference, the 57-point difference in their wide receivers. Deshaun Jackson alone, his 32 points outscores Ray's entire wide receiving core. At the end of the day, neither of these guys made any waiver additions, and Pete sits in the number 1 spot. Ray, unfortunately, sits in the 7th spot after this week. That's good for 3rd place in the Billy Madison division, 7th overall. We'll move over to the next matchup here, and it's a team that I just mentioned a minute ago. Adam Kirby, Jersey Carnage, took on Bobby Russo's Munchies. And Adam gets a really, really big win here, 153-78 and change. You could point right to Cam Newton as the reason that Bobby takes a big L here. Guy doesn't even score 1 point, and the Rams defense was all over him in this game, sacking him 3 times and getting a pick from him. Along with that, Bobby only scores a combined 17 and change from his wide receivers of Juju, Brandon Cooks, and DJ Moore, and that's just not going to cut it. It's just not going to cut it in our league. It's not like Adam was a juggernaut here. Baker Mayfield was a pretty weak point, only scoring 4.5 with a touchdown and 3 interceptions. The Browns had themselves a terrible, terrible day going up against the Tennessee Titans. I don't feel like the Titans are going to be this juggernaut team that could take down the Browns the way that they did, but when you get 42 points out of Sammy Watkins and 27, almost 28 points out of Derrick Henry, that's going to certainly do well for you. Sammy Watkins obviously outgained Bobby's entire wide receiving core. He actually outscored Bobby's entire running back core as well. And combined, those 5 players, Juju, Cooks, Moore, Bell, and Williams, only scored 4.2 points more than Sammy Watkins alone. You get that kind of production, 198 yards and 3 touchdowns. You get that kind of production from one guy, you should win every week. No waiver additions here, and these guys move on to next week. Adam is in the lead in the Happy Gilmore division, and Bobby is in 10th place, which puts him in the basement of that division. Move over to the Bobby Boucher division, where we get Rich Newman's Box of Tools taking on Jamie Hannon. And in this particular matchup, Rich takes down a big win here, but Jamie is really the disappointment here. You know, you look up and down his lineup, and unfortunately, you know, the first, I think it was like 6 or 7 rounds, this guy got auto-picked. His combination of Kelsey and Kittle, the two tight ends, only combine for about 13, maybe 14 points. And, you know, I know George Kittle had 2 touchdowns reversed in this game. So that's really disappointing to see, because that's a 12-point swing. Not that that makes a difference. You know, even if he gets those 12 points, he lost by over 50. So it would have taken a lot more to get that job done this week. Rich gets 32 points out of his running backs alone. That's Zeke Elliott and David Johnson. That is a damn nasty 1-2 punch at running back for a 2-time former champion. You add in the fact that his wide receiving core of Edelman, Galladay, and Thielen combined for 30 points. You know, and tack on him Mohamed Sanu and Kenny Stills and Curtis Samuel. That's a very serviceable wide receiving core backing up David Johnson, Zeke Elliott. You know, he's got Evan Ingram at the tight end spot. He's got Duke Johnson at the flex. You know, this is a pretty good team. I'm going to give Rich a ton of credit here. Russell Wilson is going to be the X factor on this team. Is he going to be the Russell Wilson of years past? Or is he going to be this more 15.5 points a game type of guy? If you get 15.5 a game from him, I think you'll take it. It's not a boomer bust type situation, you know, especially if it's consistent. But if it's gonna be, you know, he scores 1.5 one week and 15.5 is his ceiling, that's probably gonna be a pain in the ass. For Jamie, Mitchell Trubisky was an absolute disappointment. A 1.7, got sacked 5 times, picked off once. You know, that was an awful game against Green Bay. To add in the fact that Kyler Murray went off for 23.5 in the tie against Detroit on Sunday, I'm sure he would like to have that swap in there. You know, Murray goes for 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 5 sacks. His wide receiving core put up 21, almost 22 points, but it was hampered by the fact that Corey Davis caught as many passes as I did this weekend, and Marquise Brown on his bench went off for 31 and change, 147 yards and 2 touchdowns. You know, you get that kind of production on your bench, you're gonna lose. You know, you put Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown into this lineup over Trubisky and Corey Davis, and this game is razor thin. Absolutely razor thin. His running backs disappointed as well. Nick Chubb only rushed for 75 yards. David Montgomery only rushed for 18 yards and caught 27 yards worth of receiving yards. That's really, really disappointing from a guy like David Montgomery, who was, you know, a 5th-round pick, just outside the top 50. You know, you added Kittle and Kelsey like I talked about, and this team really disappointed this week, only scoring 70 points. The waiver ads this week, Rich dropped Curtis Samuel and picked up John Ross. Again, bulking up at wide receiving core, because this running back trio of Johnson, Elliott, and Duke Johnson are going to take him pretty far. You know, Ty Montgomery on the Jets is probably not going to see very much action. Only 2 rush attempts for 4 yards this past weekend. I don't foresee this guy being on Rich's roster very much longer. But here's a really solid win for Rich, and he stands on top of the Bobby Boucher division. Let's jump over to one of the key matchups I was watching this week because I really wanted to see what would happen here. We're going to go to Colonel Sanders, Frank Bucco, taking on Forever Young Dave Langworth. Frank gets the win here, gets it by about 16 points. Gets a great game from Drew Brees, a really great game from his wide receiving core, almost 60 points from DeAndre Hopkins, Alshon Jeffrey, and Emmanuel Sanders. Gets 5 touchdowns out of those 3 guys. Hopkins has the huge game, 111 and 2 TDs. Just a ridiculous week from those guys. And turns around and has a pretty awful week from his running backs. Todd Gurley gets 3 rushing yards short of 100, but no touchdown. And Sony Michel only puts up 14 yards. I feel like Sony Michel was one of those boomer bust guys in the preseason that everybody believed he might be poised for a breakout, but it's Bill Belichick, man. Like, you're not going to see the type of consistent running back play from the New England Patriots this season because they've got like 4. Hunter Henry disappointed 60 yards in a game where the Chargers scored 30 points. And, his strategy of going kicker and defense early pays off this week. He got 24 points out of them. For Dave, Deshaun Watson gave him a great game. His wide receivers did not. They accounted for 15.5 points. That was Frank's entire wide receiving core individually, with the exception of Emmanuel Sanders, outscored Dave's entire wide receiving core. Stephon Diggs, Jarvis Landry, Sterling Shepard. Which is really disappointing because you put together a wide receiving core like that. It's not elite. Stephon Diggs being the number 1 there. He might not even be the number 1 on his own team. Landry is not a number 1 on his own team. In fact, he's probably the 3rd or 4th option at best. And Sterling Shepard's quarterback is Eli Manning. So there you go. And it looks like Shepard had a concussion in this game. So he might not even play next week, which is pretty disappointing. Running backs, he got a great game from Josh Jacobs and an awful game from Devontae Freeman. Freeman rushed for 19 yards, caught 12 yards worth of receiving yards, and lost a fumble. So, you got to hang on to the ball. Got a great tight end performance from Delaney Walker, 17.5, and matched Frank as far as the kicker and defense is concerned this week with 24. Waiver additions this week, Frank dropped Kyle Rudolph and picked up Demaryius Thomas. I don't know if Demaryius Thomas is going to be worth anything, but considering that he's going to be Frank's wide receiver 4, I think he'll take that if he gets anything out of him. And he added Malcolm Brown, Terry McLaurin, and Chris Thompson. Two running backs that appear to... Well, he handcuffs Todd Gurley, first of all. And that's the smartest thing you can do. Because if something happens to Todd Gurley, he's got the guy who's going to step in. And he doesn't have to go to the waiver wire to dig something up. Terry McLaurin is this breakout kid from Washington. The Redskins are going to be terrible. But if this is their top wide receiver, somebody's got to catch the ball. And he went off for, I think it was like 100 yards this week. If he's going to be Frank's wide receiver 4 or 5 with Demaryius Thomas, I think he'll take that. And finally, Chris Thompson becomes his running back 3-ish. He's got Justice Hill in Baltimore. He's got Matt Breida in San Francisco. Breida's probably going to get a bump in playing time this week with Tevin Coleman out. It's basically Todd Gurley and a bunch of question marks after that at his running back spot. Chris Thompson at least has a defined role of a 3rd down pass catching back. And in that Washington offense, when they're down by a lot of points at the end of the game, this is the guy that they're going to, check down to, and he could pay dividends. So I like the pickup from Frank. I like what Frank's done here. Say what you want. He's put together a pretty good team, and I would be quite concerned if I were going up against him in future weeks. We move on to the next matchup, and that's going to be mine against Jared. It's going to be the close matchup of the week. Jared takes it down by 5 points. He got a good performance out of Matt Ryan, a really good performance out of Michael Thomas, Allen Robinson, and T.Y. Hilton. 2 of those guys go for over 100. T.Y. Hilton gets 2 receiving touchdowns and 87 yards. Combined, they put up 53.2 points. Just really putting the pressure on me. However, I did answer with my own pair of players this week. Running backs disappointed for him this week. James Conner only got him 6.5. Kerryon Johnson only got him 6.5. That's just not gonna cut it. They combined for less than 100 rushing yards. They combined for just over 50 receiving yards. Um, that's not going to cut it in this league. You need to have a guy who's going to carry the load, and getting only 12 points out of your running backs is really disappointing. Mark Andrews got him 100 yards and a receiving touchdown at the tight end spot. D.D. Westbrook was serviceable with 9.5, and the kicker and defense only put up 6 points for him. On my side, Phillip Rivers gave me 28.5 points. Tom Brady actually gave him 5 points more on the bench. I guess starting Brady would have been the play there. My wide receiving core only put up 20.5 points of Mike Williams, Calvin Ridley, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Obviously Antonio Brown's on the bench this week with all the bullshit that went on between Oakland and New England. I didn't like the matchup of James Washington against New England. So I went with this group of guys. And, I feel like most weeks they're going to be much better than this. But at least they outscored Jared's running backs, because my running backs basically kept pace with his wide receivers in Barkley and Eckler. Eckler went the fuck off. 96 yards, 96 receiving yards, 58 rushing yards, and 3 total touchdowns for over 33 points this week. The tight end, Jared Cook, didn't give me much, and that's probably the difference in the matchup. Everything else sort of lines up at least relatively close. And not getting anything out of Cook and seeing Mark Andrews go off. That's where the matchup is won right there. No waiver ads from either of us. Playing Brady would have made this come within 0.3 of a point. Jared did, however, and I want to give him credit. Jared did offer me a trade when it was said that Antonio Brown was cut by the Raiders. He offered me Mason Crosby straight up. That was very, very gentlemanly of him. I unfortunately had to turn him down. I also have a standing bet with Frank this week. Well, actually for the season. Frank believes that Antonio Brown will gain less than 800 yards on the season. I took the over. The guy has put up, 5 straight 1,200-yard seasons? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight 1,200-yard seasons. And in 3 of those seasons, the last 3 years, he's played 15, 14, and 15 games. So if I get him for 15 games this year, I pretty much guarantee he's gonna get more than 800 yards. I will take him for over 1,000 to 1,200, please, as alongside putting Tom Brady on this team. I feel like this team could go a long way if those two get in sync. Jared's running back's disappointed, and I wonder if that's going to be a trend this season with him. James Conner is going to be the replacement for Le'Veon Bell. He was all of last year and was very impressive, but can he duplicate it this year? Can Kerryon Johnson, on a team that's probably going to lose a hell of a lot more games than they win, is he going to see enough touches to be somebody that you can rely on as an RB2? Add in Miles Sanders, Rashad Penny as his 3 and 4 running backs. Penny's not even a starter on his team. Miles Sanders is like 3rd in line. It's going to be really interesting to see if Jared can go back to the promised land and get his belt back. We'll move on to the next matchup here, and this is going to be one of the true disappointments of the week. We see Ken Ames, the Silverton, taking on Mike Mazzetta's Young Legends. And Ken gets a really strong win here. He gets a terrible performance from Jameis Winston, and the fact that he left high scorer for the week Lamar Jackson on the bench, 45.5 points, left him on the bench and still got this win. This could have been a hell of a lot worse. He got almost 40 points out of his wide receiving core of Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin, and Tyler Boyd. Got over 30 points from his running backs, but that's almost all Dalvin Cook, because Joe Mixon appears to be down with an ankle injury, and probably isn't going to play next week against the Niners. Um, this was an interesting week for injuries, especially in this matchup. You add in Tevin Coleman, who got injured with a high ankle sprain as well. He's probably going to be out a couple of weeks. And all of a sudden, Ken's running back group doesn't look very deep. He just has to pick and choose and find his way to get another running back because two of them just went down. O.J. Howard disappointed. He got 17 points out of his kicker and defense, though. Over to Mike's team, disappointing week from Aaron Rodgers. Again, that game in Chicago was just absolutely dreadful to watch. His wide receiving core put up 34.5 from Julio Jones, Tyreek Hill, and John Brown. But there again, another guy bites the dust here. Looks like Tyreek Hill is going to be down for a month to 6 weeks with a broken collarbone. It doesn't sound like he needs surgery, which was what I was concerned about because the way the collarbone broke from what I was reading, when your collarbone breaks, it can fracture and go down into your chest cavity, and that would require surgery, and certainly be much more serious. That's why they transported him to the hospital during the game. Luckily enough, he escaped that injury, but this type of injury, we've seen guys like Tony Romo and many others. Romo's just the first one off the top of my head that sticks out because he did it like fucking 3 times. He's going to miss a lot of time here. And even when he comes back, luckily enough, he's not throwing the ball, but even when he comes back, you could see him be a bit skittish and probably, have a difficult time going over the middle, especially a guy like Tyreek Hill, who's so incredibly fast and stretches the field. You might run into an issue where, he's getting alligator arms trying not to get hurt again. Considering that this wide receiving core was going to be the bulk of his, was going to be the anchor of his team, at some point it would have been Julio Jones, Tyreek Hill, and A.J. Green, as A.J. Green is still recovering from his ankle injury. He's now going to have to piece this thing together for a few weeks because Tyreek Hill's not going to be there. Julio Jones had a bad game, only got 31 yards. And John Brown all of a sudden steps out and says, "Hi, remember me? I'm now on the Bills, and I put up 123 yards and a touchdown." And then those guys are going to the Giants this week. So they play in the Meadowlands on back-to-back games against both teams. And John Brown could break out this year. Really disappointing week from his running backs, Phillip Lindsay and Jordan Howard. We saw in the draft that Mike waited a very long time to go get running backs, and this is not a duo that I would say, this might be the worst running back duo in the league, probably the worst running back core in the league when you add in the fact that it's Lindsay, Howard, Drake, and LaShawn McCoy. Those 4 guys all have question marks and all have guys breathing down their necks. LaShawn McCoy has Damian Williams. Kenyon Drake has Kalen Ballage. Jordan Howard has Miles Sanders and another fucking guy. Phillip Lindsay, he's got Royce Freeman. There's just a question mark at every one of these guys. Some weeks they'll probably break out, but I would imagine that this is more the production you're going to see week in and week out at the running back position from Mike. Tight end, Zach Ertz, probably the second best in the league behind Travis Kelce. He only puts up 5.5 this week, and you add in the shutout to the Cleveland defense and only 3 points from Jason Myers, and this is a really bad week for Mike, 66 points. Waiver ads this week. Kenny drops Adrian Peterson for Randall Cobb, drops Dante Pettis for Giovanni Bernard. So there's his answer to the running back issue, is picking up Gio Bernard this week because Adrian Peterson didn't suit up. Jalen Samuels only got 6 total yards. This is not a running back crew that can afford 2 injuries of his top 3 guys. Mike drops Cleveland's defense for Tennessee's defense. I believe Tennessee next week has Jacksonville. Like I said, this was incredibly plagued with injuries, but we'll see what comes of it this week. Mike is going to have to find somebody to plug into his wide receiver 3 spot. The next guy up on his roster is Devontae Parker, who did put up 75 yards, but the defense gave up 59 points in that game, so they're going to be scoring. They're going to be trying to score as many points as possible, obviously, and probably playing from behind. We'll go to and that'll do it. Actually, that's all 6 matchups. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's all 6 matchups, guys. This is how it's going to be every week. I'm going to just sort of go over every matchup. I'll be happy to have guys on this particular show if you'd like. I do it in my fantasy baseball league that I play with Frank and Bobby. They're both very familiar with it. If you guys want to call in, just give me a call on the phone. I can hook you up to the microphone, and we can chit chat about the week and about the matchups. Until then, we'll see you next week.